I live in a not so large, not so friendly block of flats. Well, it's really more of a converted old Victorian house, which is now modified into 5 small flats per block, with there being 4 blocks and me living in the second one. Just for some context, the main door is really crappy and still hasn't been replaced even though the entire building has been refurbished. This is the case despite the landlord promising it would be done by New Year. Anyway, this door doesn't lock when you close it. It has to be locked manually either by the key from the outside or by the twisty lock on the inside. Unfortunately, the people who live around me can be, well, let's say rude, and that's putting it kindly. They're always blasting music until late, setting off the fire alarm which is linked in every flat, and it's super loud and annoying. I'm smoking inside most of the time. However, the most annoying thing, always, and I mean always, is leaving the main door unlocked. This was nothing more than annoying up until very recently, when something truly horrific happened as a result. It was a Thursday night, and as usual I was getting ready for bed at around 11 PM. And as per usual, despite it being a weekday, one of the surrounding flats in a different block to mine was throwing a party. This was annoying and unfair. Come on guys, for real, who throws a party on a Thursday? I mean, just wait for Friday. Not only that though, it's supposed to be lockdown, so while other people can't even see their families, me included, you get to keep everyone up. The music was noticeable but not super loud from the comfort of my bedroom, thankfully. So I do what I always do when I go to bed. I put on some scary stories to help me chill out and sleep. So I finally managed to drift off at around midnight, and I awoke for the first time at around 2 because of the music. So I growl and begrudgingly get up to go to the bathroom, as I thought I may as well as I'm already up. So annoyed and frustrated, I get back into bed and continue to enjoy my stories until I'm asleep once more. I'm suddenly awoken by loud stomps coming up the stairs. I live at the very top of the building, so the final staircase only leads to my door. Now I'm more exhausted than angry, so I just lie there awake until I hear something that jolts my half-asleep brain fully awake. My door is being pushed. Someone is actually trying to push open my door and enter my flat, without my permission. Not hard or forcefully, mind you. Not like they were trying to break it down, but they definitely tried to gain entry. Now this may be just because my mind was still foggy, or that I was still so tired that I didn't care, but I stupidly assumed it was some drunken partygoer who had mistakenly gone to the wrong block. Maybe the party was at a different top floor flat, so I ignored them, even when it happened again and I could hear scratching and mumbling on the other side of the door. Stupid, I know, but I really wanted to sleep. So the next morning I woke up as usual and got ready for work. As I opened my door to leave, what do I see? 2 men sleeping on the floor blocking my way, one bleeding from his head, and I'm not judgmental, or at least try not to be, but these men were clearly homeless. I mean, the smell of one alone told me that it was like having a ball of dirt slapped in your face. Not ideal for an early morning start. When I eventually got one of them to get up, the other failed to do so. He was clearly on drugs and was completely out of it. Thankfully for me, the man was okay. I mean, I could have just been rushed, but they explained that they had been attacked and chased and took shelter here. I offered to call an ambulance, which the men eventually accepted, through a one-sided conversation of murmurs and groans. So I stepped out to get a better look at the man on the ground, and as I did, the other stepped inside my flat. I stared at him with our eyes locked, and he came right back out without incident as I locked my door. The ambulance eventually arrived. I had to dial 999 as there was no one manning the non-emergency number, probably because of the current pandemic, and I went to work. Informed the landlord, and he would warn the other people living there apparently that they must keep the door locked. But of course every morning I get to work and the door is wide open without consequence. But the real kicker is that because the guy was bleeding and homeless, I didn't want to clean it up myself, so I had to get a professional cleaner to do it. And when I asked for my landlord to chip in, he ignored me for a few days, and when he eventually got back to me, he said, "It's only on the walks." Brilliant. So I ended up paying the whole thing myself because I just didn't feel comfortable with it being around me. Now, I do not believe those men had intentions to hurt me, but what if I hadn't have locked my door? What if they had have gotten in? When people are desperate and opportunities present themselves, you really don't know what people will do. 2 of them, 1 of me, alone, asleep, vulnerable. Pretty scary when you think about it.
Just to give some context, I'm currently in the UK, and the town where I live in is known for its drug scene, but doesn't have a violent crime problem to speak of. I think that's why I found what happened so shocking, because I lived in London before, and while some messed up stuff did happen to me there, it was nowhere near the level of what happened to me earlier this year. My partner and I live together in our flat, which is in a relatively busy residential area. I work from home, however, and he's out of the flat quite a lot, so I guess it might look to an outside observer like I live alone. Our flat complex was once an old factory, and we have these huge industrial windows, so people walking on the street have a pretty clear view of our dining room, which is where I work during the day. It all started in July of this year. I'm ashamed to say that I can be a major rubbernecker, and a lot of drama occurs on the road outside of our flat, so I look out of the windows often during my workday for some light entertainment. The best was a 2-hour breakup I got to watch unfold in the car just below our window, but that's besides the point. One day, I got up to make myself a cup of tea, looked out of the kitchen window, and saw this guy just staring at me. I was struck by how intense it was and how he didn't look away, even when it was obvious that I was looking back at him. I felt creeped out by it, and I tried not to let it bother me. We have a lot of drug addicts and other weird characters that hang out around here, so it didn't seem like such a big deal. I went back to work, and by the time I'd sat down at the table, he was gone. About a week later, my partner had gone to visit his dad for the weekend, so I was excited to hunker down and catch up on some of my favorite shows alone. After about 30 minutes, the buzzer to the flat went. The buzzer is so loud and it scared the heck out of me. I was lucky my popcorn didn't go flying out of my hands. Now, our flat complex has this big porch where teenagers and addicts love to hang out because it provides shelter from the rain and about 4 people can sit down inside of it. Sometimes people lean up on the buzzers by accident when they're hanging out in the porch, so I assumed that was what happened. After a few seconds, however, the buzzer went again, and again, and again. Someone was pressing it in this rhythmic pattern. It's something I know my partner does when he's forgotten his keys, and it's kind of our code for me to let him in, which is why I found it so disconcerting. At first, I was worried he might have missed the bus to his dad's house and had decided to come back to the flat. I was nearly about to buzz him straight in when I thought it would be a good idea to pick up the phone first and check who it was. As soon as I picked up the phone, the person standing near the intercom must have heard because they said, "Hello?" It was definitely not my partner. I asked who it was and why they were buzzing the flat so late at night, but all they said was, "Can you let me in?" I asked them why they wanted to come in, and they said, "You invited me, remember?" While they were talking, they kept kind of laughing under their breath, and the whole exchange put me on edge. I told them I had no idea who they were and just hung up. I was expecting them to start pressing the buzzer again, but they didn't. After a few minutes, I crept out of the flat to have a look at who was on the porch, but they were gone. My partner has to get up early for work, whereas I'm more of a night owl. Most nights, I'm up until about 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. working on my laptop while he's asleep. A few nights after the intercom incident, I was on my laptop watching YouTube videos and realized that we'd forgotten to take the trash out. This happens a lot, and it's not uncommon for me to take the trash out at around 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. At least it wasn't until all this happened. I put my slippers on, grabbed the bag of trash, and took it out to the curb outside the flat's main entrance. When I looked across the street, there was this guy standing on the opposite street corner. He was watching me, and his eyes followed me all the way from the front door to the curb. I noticed he was smoking, so I assumed he lived in one of the houses across the street. I remember even thinking, wouldn't it be creepy if he tried to come over here? As I put the trash bag down, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. I looked up and saw him walking in a straight line across the road towards me, with his eyes fixed on me the entire time. I don't know how to describe it, but the look on his face filled me with this instinctive sense of dread. It felt like someone had just turned my stomach inside out. I pulled my keys out of my hoodie pocket, turned around, and ran to the front door. I've never felt that kind of fear before, and it was like my body was compelling me to get as far away from this man as possible. I got into the building, slammed the door behind me, and rushed to my flat without looking back. I didn't want to know whether he followed me or not. I told my partner about the whole thing the next day and how shook up I was. We agreed that we'd be more proactive with trash, and I've never taken it out late at night again. Fast forward to the beginning of August, about 2 weeks after the trash incident, and I'd pretty much forgotten all about it. I was still too scared to go out late at night on the road, but nothing weird had happened since then. I went to bed at about 2 a.m., but I felt restless for some reason and struggled to get to sleep. By about 3 a.m., I was contemplating whether or not to give up and go do something else when I heard this scream. The sound cut right through me. There was something visceral about the terror in that scream. I knew it was bad because my partner went from stone cold asleep to being up in a shot. He asked me what it was, and I said I didn't know. I went to the window straight away and looked out. Down one of the side roads near our flat, I could see headlights, but I couldn't get a clear view of the car. The screaming continued in bursts, and after a while, I could make out words. It was a woman, and she was saying something like, get out, over and over again. I'm used to hearing all kinds of domestic arguments take place on the road outside of our flat, particularly since we're near the university and several popular bars. But this was different. There was this raw fear in her voice that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I turned to my partner and said I had to call the police. When they picked up and I explained what was happening, they seemed disinterested at first, but the operator's tone changed when I told them where it was. I think they must have been getting calls from all around the area about it. It was sometime during this phone call that I heard a screech of tires and the screaming stopped. The operator asked me to go to the window and describe to them what was happening. When I looked down, there was this black car sat on the road. One of the neighbors from across the road was speaking to the two guys in the car. I had to twist to get a good look at them, but one of the guys in the car looked uncannily like the guy who had been watching me when I was putting out the trash that time. At first, the conversation seemed congenial, but it took a turn when the neighbor asked them some sort of question that I couldn't quite hear clearly, and they sped off down the road. With no less than 10 minutes, 3 police cars arrived and had blocked off the roads leading to our flat. Our residential area is on a grid system. They were knocking on doors and asking to speak to all of our neighbors. I told my partner that we should go out and speak to them, and since we saw a lot of what happened and my partner had the foresight to write down the license plate of the black car. When we went out, there were these 2 girls talking to one of the police officers. They were both shaking, and one of them looked as though they had been crying. I decided to stand nearby and wait for the girls to finish before speaking with the officer myself. What they said made my blood run cold. They were from one of the houses that looked out directly onto the road where I had seen the headlights, so they had a clear view of what had happened. Like us, they had been alerted by the screaming and gone straight to the window. From what they could gather, the black car had cut off a small red car on the road, like pulled right in front of it, and that's what had caused the girl driving the red car to scream the first time. They thought it might have been some kind of misunderstanding, but then they watched as one of the guys from the black car got out, walked to the red car, and jumped in through the window. That's the point when the girl must have been screaming, get out, get out. There had been a struggle, and the girl watching said they assumed the guy was just trying to steal the car, but then he forced the driver into the back seat, and that's when he drove off. The 2 girls were both hysterical by this point, and you could tell they felt guilty for not intervening. I could feel that same guilt seeping into my thoughts as well. After the guy had driven off in the red car, the two men in the black car had gone the opposite way and turned the corner onto our road, but had been stopped by another neighbor. Although this neighbor had been alerted by the screaming, he hadn't actually witnessed what happened, so he had stopped the black car to ask the guy what was going on without knowing they were involved, and that was the exchange we saw. When the guys started acting suspicious, he asked them if they would wait for the police to arrive, and that's the point when they took off. It wasn't until we got back to the flat that I started to put two and two together. I have a small red car, just like the one that the girls had described, and I normally come back at night on that day of the week since it's the day I go to visit my parents. I had only come back early on this particular occasion because I needed to let a plumber in to do some work on the flat. What if they had been waiting for me, and they had gotten the wrong car? Over the next few days, I contacted the police several times and checked the local news, but I never heard anything about the girl who was kidnapped. I still have no idea what happened to her, and all I know is that they found her car abandoned somewhere not far from where she was taken, but she wasn't in it. It still gives me chills just thinking about it. I've lived in Utah for most of my life other than a few years in Wyoming. I'm an Uber Eats driver in Utah and have been for a couple of years now. What I'm about to tell you took place about 5 days ago. I had just gotten finished with a shift of delivering food and was on the phone with my mother when I got the bright idea to go looking for a former apartment that we had lived in when I was younger. Now, normally I carry my new 9mm on me, but that was at home. So I decided that I would go home to pick it up so that I don't have no defense if I get into a bad situation. My mother had done some research on the address of the apartment. The apartment used to be called Midtown Villa and was never full of gang activity when I was younger. So I had typed the address into my Google Maps and drove over there. I pulled in and realized that the apartment is now called the Calaveras, and everything was now looking better than it used to, so I let my guard down, which looking back on now I regret. I started polling through the apartments with my mom on the phone, which we had then agreed that I could put her on video chat so that she could see the new upgrades. I had pulled back through the entrance off the main road and started showing my mother the building that used to be our apartment building, and I was pointing at the building and empty lot next to it. That empty lot used to be a playground when I was a kid. First mistake. I was using a phone to show my mother, which made it look like I was recording. Second mistake. I was pointing. Third mistake. I was in a bad area and let my guard down. Now, why did I tell you those mistakes? Because what I didn't realize is, while I was showing my mother, I was passing a guy and a girl and pointing. Now I know all that alone doesn't seem bad, but apparently I angered someone who must have thought that I was recording them. Even though I had my 9mm with me and a loaded magazine, I had made some odd choices due to the fact that I'm a very direct person. As I continue forward, I realize that I'm being chased by the guy who is now on foot after me. He's yelling at me, calling me out and asking if I wanted to tussle after a while of running towards me and taking photos of my car. Now, before realizing it, I was suddenly moving forward faster in my car, and my mind was made up. I was getting out of there and driving off. Now, the events that are about to take place are due to the fact that I have some extensive training outside of others' knowledge, even though I had let most of that slip. My adrenaline was pumping, and instead of harnessing it, I mistakenly let it control my actions. With my mom still on video chat, I suddenly took notice of a car pulling up fast behind me. I took off out of there. The car was then behind me. I turned right. They turned right. Same turn I made again, they followed. So I went up to 9000 South and took a right after stopping, thinking that I was just being paranoid. Nope. They followed me all the way to 1300 West. And that's where I turned right again. And guess who followed? Now, I'm not going to lie. I was very nervous with multiple scenarios playing in my head because I knew that I was in a bad situation. I knew that if it came down to it, I had my pistol. I know what you're thinking. Dial 911. Well, I'm the type of person who rarely does that, and I wanted to get out of this on my own. While all these scenarios crossed my mind, I suddenly got the bright idea to turn right onto 7800 South, so I did, and then they did. But this time, a semi had gotten between us, right behind me. I was happy until the semi had turned left. Then I knew I had to figure out what to do next. My next decision was to turn left. I approached the next light in the left turn lane to get on the road that leads to 7200 South where the I-15 on-ramp was. What I didn't think about was what would happen if they followed me. What will happen next will make you reconsider not asking for help when you need it if you're like me. I turned left, they followed, and sped up on my right in that lane, so I immediately swerved over after turning my signal on and got in front of them, because let's face it, if they get next to me, it could be game over. So I slowed down a little, then they got in the left lane and sped up next to me. So I sped up, and just as we hit 90 miles per hour as well, I slammed on my brakes and they slammed on theirs and turned right. If I had been there, I could have been hit and rolled my car and even died. At the very least, I would be in hospital. That's when they took off down the road on their right, and I booked it to the interstate, drove to a grocery store near my house, and called the police department near the apartment complex to report it. The dispatcher then informed me that I should have called 911 to make the situation easier, and they would have directed me to the nearest police station with officers outside to deal with anything that followed me to the parking lot. The officer then called me and we talked about it, and he had gone on to tell me that that area was very problematic with gang activity. He believes that my extreme concern and judgment were very accurate, so I had made the report just to make it before anyone else had, so I knew that I wouldn't get a knock on the door at some later point. So I then headed home and didn't let my guard down until I got home and knew that I was safe. I told my fiancée about it the very next day, and she told me never to deliver in that area without some form of protection. So in closing, number 1, don't ever leave yourself without protection. Number 2, always ask for help when you need it because otherwise your life could be at stake. Number 3, don't be naive to your situation. I hope this doesn't happen to anyone else. And also just remember that it's not the people with pistols in their holsters that you have to watch out for. It is people who tuck them into their waistbands without a holster that you have to watch out for. Be safe, and thanks for listening.